This is Creativity Drill with Dr. Don and Jonathan Rundman.
Hey everybody, this is Jonathan Rundman, your co-host on Creativity Drill, and we're very glad you're tuning in. Our guest today is Clint Schnekloth, who actually appeared in Season 1 of our show. In fact, he was the first guest we recorded in the history of our podcast, and then his episode appeared as episode number 2 last season. And it's cool to have him back for many reasons. He also happens to be one of the most downloaded episodes, not just because he was early in the season, but because he's got lots of fans out there. And so we're happy to have him back to talk about more stuff, including his book, Mediating Faith, and just a bunch of other things.
I knew that I was going to use some of what I was just doing in life to help create the content for it. I just thought that made sense. So yeah, like there's a couple of chapters that are come out of some like a context for why I did it. And that's transparent in the chapter. So like the chapter on the massively multiplayer online role-playing games, it's also, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm giving this talk at a youth leader event.
One of my favorite chapters in the book. Now, this book was new when you appeared here.
It will be one of my favorites too when I read your book. It's been, has it been a year and a half since we did this?
No, it's been 2 years.
2 years? Yeah. 2 years in April.
Because you were our first guest that we recorded, but then your episode, I believe, was the second episode.
Right.
And Jonathan had read your book. As you can see, it's highlighted throughout.
Yeah, he had.
And I have not read your book yet.
So how many podcasts have you guys done now since then?
24?
Yeah,
nice work.
Yeah.
That's
and
impressive.
I have not read your book. I'm feeling a little bad about that, Clint. I've read many other books, just not your book.
Usually,
but I will read your book.
For the podcast, I follow the Larry King model, you know, the CNN anchor from the 80s. And his rule, which I heard on the radio or something, was that he never read the books of his author guests because he wanted to be in the shoes of the listener who probably hadn't read the book.
Oh, interesting.
And so he acted as a surrogate for his listeners in the most literal way and said, like, hey, author, I don't know what your book is about. But I think that's a legitimate way to go. So usually that's what we've done. But actually, I did read your book before you were on last time. Has this book had a second life? No pun intended. Like, did it get reissued? I mean, it started in paperback, so it never got to get a paperback issue.
Yeah, no, it didn't get like a second publishing in the sense of a transition to a different format, but
there's an ebook version.
It got a second life once about a year later because when Fortress Press was trying out a new marketing strategy for digital publishing, they did this big sale where they offered all their digital books. I think it was last.
Oh, I remember that because you were on social media. It was like a year later,
like on January.
For $1.99
It was $1.99 or $2.99.
How did that feel?
Well, I really liked it because they started with mine. Which they said they did that because it was it matched the topic of the book. You know,
sure.
It's about digital social media, at least in part. And there aren't that many books published by Augsburg Fortress that are in that area. It's not a focus of Fortress Press. And then they started rolling out a lot of other books. And I got really excited and bought a whole bunch of Fortress Press titles on my Kindle during that time because they even did some of like the Bonhoeffer volumes, which in hardback would be $60, and for like a week it was $2.99 per volume. So I got like the Sermons of Bugenhagen and a couple of other books that I wouldn't have bought otherwise, probably in print. But so it was fun to watch that. But what was interesting on Amazon was then when they ran that $2.99 deal, it pushed my paperback book down in price temporarily. So for a while, people were able to buy the book for $2.61.
Wow.
And I wasn't thinking when that happened, I should have bought like 100 copies of it for myself, because then I could have like sold them or used them or given them away or whatever, but I didn't. And I don't know, somebody must have noticed what had happened, because like then the next day it was back up to $22.71 or whatever.
Now, when you appeared on our podcast in the very earliest days of the podcast, the book was brand new, and you were in support of this brand new title. And so since then, it's been more than a year since the book has been out there living a life. And I'd
2
love
years.
to know what kind of repercussions has it had for you as a first-time published author with a book in mainstream availability?
Or what opportunities?
Yeah, like you get an interesting email. Is the book infecting the normal life of people that you've never met in person?
Did you say infect or affect?
Infect, but infecting in a good way.
Inception, yeah. Though the year after it was published, the biggest effect it had was I got a number of invitations to speak at different kinds of events.
Yeah.
Not a ton. I didn't end up going on some kind of like grand months-long tour or something like that, but I had about 5 or 6 events last year in 2015.
That's a lot for 1 year. I think.
Yeah, probably. Well, I couldn't do much more since I have a day job.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke at 2 synod assemblies. Not the synod assemblies. The training events for incoming clergy or people that are in the process to become clergy. The biggest one that I spoke at was actually an Episcopalian clergy conference down in Houston. And I actually was on the docket together with Shane Claiborne, which was kind of cool.
Oh, yeah.
It made me a little nervous. I was like in the middle of giving my presentation, and Shane like walks in the back and is like looking at me, and he's like a speaker and author that I look up to, and it was kind of weird to be in that position. And then just a couple of other things where I traveled and spoke. And so I prepared content from the book or comparable to the book, although I pushed forward in some areas because I've gotten real interested in robots and post-humanity.
Oh, yeah.
In relationship to some of the topics in the book. And
what is post-humanity?
Anything that is essentially the merger of new technology with the human body.
Okay.
AI.
Singularity?
Yeah,
Maybe?
post-humanity is a term that often is used around what we might... People don't know whether there's going to be a singularity per se or not, but when you shift beyond the human to whatever's next, that's a post-human.
Post-humanity. Okay, thank you.
And so I talked about those things, and those things are immensely interesting to me, and I sometimes felt like I gave the presentations at some of those gatherings, and it was a little beyond what they wanted to talk about, because then in the Q&A it would be like, on Facebook groups, what's the difference between open and closed or whatever, right? Which is more like
so they were
New Media 101.
Right.
That was like my mom in the audience.
Yeah. And I'm not opposed to answering those kinds of questions, and those are also they're practical and interesting, but I've never really tried to posture myself as being a Media 101 specialist. I think there are people who do that better than me.
Yeah.
So if you want that, you should have like Meredith Gould come and give a presentation at your thing about how to use these different media platforms for forwarding your... I'm kind of much more interested in the philosophical and what's next type of questions. And so I would end up with a subgroup of the larger group that would come afterwards and would have these questions and topics. It would be the techier people or the geek culture, I guess. And then I haven't had as many of those. I haven't had any scheduled this year, other than I am teaching a class at Fuller Theological Seminary in the fall.
That's the one in California.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I'm doing a course in the fall in their DMin program, and it's Understanding and Engaging a Post-Christian World. And I think that probably one of the reasons why they were interested in me pitching a course for them is that I published a book.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's a gravity that comes along with
Well,
having a book out.
I wanted to highlight that exact fact because whenever we do these podcasts, I'm always thinking about the listener who is a creative person who wants to get their work out to the world. And my opinion, and I would like to use Clint as a living example of this, is that if you want to take the next step in your creative life, you have to have an artifact. And that means a book, a CD, an album, a print of your painting, an audio recording, some physical or digital artifact that you can either leave behind or sell. Because no matter how good your content is, like you say, there's a gravity that comes with the fact that I wrote a book and here's the book, or I made a record and here's the record, or I made a painting and I have prints of it, And so even if it's not a hugely expensive artifact or a hugely grandiose one, just any old thing is better than nothing. And I think your content before you had the book was awesome and just as good as it is now. But now that you have good content and an artifact, now that's a whole other ballgame.
It's like a booster pack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I would say any of you who are listening and you're thinking, gosh, I wish my music career went somewhere, or I wish, if you haven't made a record that's publicly available, or if you're an author and maybe your novel's not done, but boy, what if you did a little book of essays that you self-published and printed at Kinko's and sold for $5? I mean, just anything that you can leave behind that has your web address on it. That is, in my opinion, a great thing.
I went back and forth on self-publishing the book, and one of the pieces of advice I got from some people who do kind of market themselves either as speakers or authors is wait to do that for your second or your third book.
Oh, interesting.
They said that although things are shifting in publishing where people are honoring self-publishing more than they used to, there still is a special gravity that comes along with having published something through a traditional publisher.
Oh my gosh, totally.
And so, the fact that I was able to publish it with Fortress Press was also really helpful because it was that's a established, known publishing house, and that offers a certain kind of weight and credibility behind it.
Right.
What's interesting, though, so continuing on this idea of the artifact, because I do think that that's important, there's a chicken and egg kind of thing here. I think Fortress Press was more interested in publishing my book because I also had a digital media footprint. They knew I had a platform for marketing the book that they could rely on in addition to their own platform of publishing and marketing. And that's increasingly what publishers are doing. They're wondering if we take this book from this author, do they already have a platform that we can use? So the way to have a platform is you can have some artifacts that are there's a lower bar of entry that you can get started on. One would be for example, just create a nice web page for yourself. Like if you're trying to say that you want to speak on a topic and you have some level of expertise on it, people are going to ask, what's your website so I can check out what you do? Yeah. I think a website would count as your artifact kind of thing.
Definitely.
Or a blog, a podcast, and then also showing longevity. I think that if you say you've got a podcast and then people look and you've done 1 or 2 episodes, they're going to be like, whatever. But if you've been hosting a podcast for a period of time, then that starts to lend some credibility too.
Yeah. Oh, this reminds me of another little bit of show business wisdom here. Because you said you had the nice opportunity of doing your first book through a real publisher that wasn't yourself, and save the second or third book for self-publishing. And I think that's great advice. And because maybe it's not your second or third book, but you have your whole life to make books. You might write 20 books in your life, or who knows. And you can always self-publish one. 10 years from now, 30 years from now, that's always an option. And it's true for anybody in the arts. You can always just do it out of your trunk. especially with technology as your friend these days. And I heard this great nugget of wisdom from a real show business, I don't want to say his name, but it's someone here in the Twin Cities who's kind of a rock and roll business legend. And I heard through the grapevine that he had this quote, and the quote was, "Sell out first." And of course, he's talking about rock bands. But the point being that if you're kind of young and talented and really like catching a wave and about to make it big, and you get an opportunity to put out a record on a label, or in this case, a book in a publishing with a publishing arrangement, what happens in the music business oftentimes is the label comes along and says, "We think you could be a star. We think you're awesome, but we're going to choose the producer, and you have to do these songs." And they sort of like take a lot of artistic control away from the artist. And so this showbiz guy here in town would say, "That's fine. Sacrifice your artistic credibility early to have the sellout experience appear on a big label first, because then when you get dumped from the label, like everybody does, then you have a national audience, and you can always say, I did a record on this such and such a big label, and you know thousands of people because someone paid for you to go on Jimmy Fallon one time, you know. Whereas if you don't sell out and you hold on to your artistic credibility like a true punk rocker, well then no one's ever heard of you forever. So I just thought it sounds crass and it sounds conniving, but that was his line, like, sell out first.
Well, I think it's similar to the line of the joke. The only good dissertation is a finished one.
What, like, expand upon that?
Well, people get in the middle of writing their dissertations for their PhDs, and they've got all these ideals about what they're going to argue and the content, and then they submit it to their dissertation supervisor, and the supervisor's like, well, you need to change this chapter, and I think this argument over here is weak. And if you get your shorts in a knot and you're like, I'm not going to do that, they're just being stubborn, or I don't agree with my dissertation advisor, that's a very bad strategy, because they're the gatekeeper,
right,
and they're either going to sign off on that thing or not. So the only good dissertation is a finished dissertation, you know. Like, so you hear the stuff back and you think to yourself, instead of idealizing the one thing that you've written, this dissertation, you're like, right, the purpose of this dissertation is to earn that degree. Yeah, that's my goal. So do that, and then you, like you said, you've got a career ahead of you with higher levels of academic freedom afterwards, where you can pursue things more along your own. But the dissertation process is really a hoop jumping, hurdle jumping kind of process. That's it's by design, and you might end up with a really difficult dissertation advisor, but work with them and figure it out. And I think probably working with any industry is like that too. Now, if you work really hard and you sell a lot of albums, then when you retire, you can kick them all in the ass, right? Like Steve Miller did.
Right, exactly.
Rock and Roll Hall of
We're
Fame.
all going towards that topic, which I was hoping to talk about. But yeah, that's right. And I've been interested. I'm always interested to talk about in the arts.
Steve Miller?
This is the Steve Miller Band.
Is this?
Oh, do you know that Clint and I have had a Facebook conversation about Steve Miller?
No, I know you were talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but are you saying that the conversation tonight needs to end up at Steve Miller?
Oh, no,
is that what you said?
Yes, well, he did say that.
Well,
okay.
we could address it. It's super topical, having to do with something that just happened.
Okay.
So it might.
Okay, that's okay. Well,
and we're white men, and we watched a video about it, so we believe we're experts on it. So we're going to talk about it on this radio program.
Okay, next topic.
Don vetoes our talk about the Steve Miller at the Rock and Roll.
Can I have my topic?
Yeah, you go. You do your topic. Because I can talk about the Steve Miller issue without talking about the Steve Miller guy.
Can I talk about something completely different?
Please.
All right. We might get back to what we were just talking about with sell out first. And can I say that when I was doing my dissertation, all I wanted to do was finish it. So I did not have any grandiose hopes that it was going to be published or that I needed to go refuse someone's feedback on a chapter.
You're just like, get it.
Please, let's get this done. So, and my first advisor died. So that was also a major wrench. But I was very fortunate that my second one was great. So I want to talk to you about living in Arkansas. And I've followed with interest. Every once in a while, you will post something about what it's like to live in a place that a lot of people have stereotypes about, because it's part of the southern United States and because of kind of limited information they might have. Mm-hmm. And I think it takes some creative thinking and practices to get to know about a regional community with which you may have had no previous experience. I know that you grew up in the Midwest. You grew up in Iowa. Mm-hmm. You've gone to school in Iowa. You have lived in Wisconsin. You have gone to seminary in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So you have a kind of that Midwestern ethos thing pretty well in hand as far as understanding, the culture of a people that you would be, serving in your profession, but just also sort of what is it like to live in a Midwestern community. And so you've been in Arkansas for how many years now?
Over 5.
Over 5. And so I want to hear from you. What are creative ways to learn about a community that is very different, just geographically and, other cultural facets too?
I would say I only have one real best practice in mm-hmm. terms of what you're asking, and that's this. I'm unwilling to accept northern stereotypes of the South, and I'm quite bothered by them actually in the same way Southerners are. Mm-hmm. So I get really mad when, for example, Northerners talk about how the recent passage of these laws in North Carolina and Mississippi is just a Southern thing. Because number one, there's a whole bunch of Northerners who are totally supportive of that kind of legislation. And just wait, there's going to be some Midwest states that probably pass the same kind of shit that Mississippi and North Carolina just passed. So that's one thing. But then another thing is that overlooks the fact that there's many people in Mississippi and North Carolina who are actively fighting against that legislation. And they're Southerners too. So it's like... Mm-hmm. What kind of stereotype is that you want to class everybody together as if all of North Carolina wanted that law to pass? Mm-hmm. They didn't. They just happened to be a minority, or they were jockeyed out of power in order to, get maneuvered into a space where these things could pass. So I get, on behalf of Southerners, I get bothered by Northern stereotypes of the South, because a lot of times I don't think they're true, and other times I think the very things that Northerners are saying about Southerners are just equally true of Northerners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you're going to say that. I was going to ask about some of these hot button issues going on in the southern states right now, because we know you and get to have lunch with you once a year or so, but we really see you most active on the internet and social media. And it seems to me, as somebody who's known you for a decade or more, that you are a little crankier than you've been in the past, or maybe just publicly a little more publicly bothered, and are more vocal about your frustrations, and you've certainly taken some public stands in your life as a pastor and in your regular citizen life and your life on the internet that have resulted in some drama in your life in the last couple of years. That's been interesting to watch online. And I'm always impressed and kind of amazed how unabashed you are to just come out and say stuff that I would have trouble working up the chutzpah to say the kinds of stuff that you say all the time online.
Clint is grinning right now. now he's laughing.
And so
silently.
I'm wondering, is this a development that is kind of ratcheting up for you, or were you always like this and you didn't have the occasion to let your freak flag fly as much, or are you getting more publicly vocal about your agitation with your age, or maybe since you moved down there?
Well, there's also the degree of risk involved.
It seems like you're taking some risks in terms of public risks in terms of your speech and your opinions and your clarity of expression.
That's probably true. I think. So there's a couple of reasons why I think that's the case. One, it might be related to what we were just talking to before. It's like after you publish a book and you get tenure and you've jumped some hoops, you have more academic freedom in a teaching context than you did. It's like you're careful until you've got full professor, and then you can just do what you do. And I feel like maybe
that's a benefit or a good thing about tenure as an idea,
right?
Is because you want your professors to be free to express themselves,
right? And I feel like maybe I've, in some way or another, for better or worse, kind of come into my tenure as a clergy person in some new ways. I think it's a lot less about having moved to Arkansas, and more having to do with having gotten to that position where I feel like I'm free. There's probably a couple of different reasons. One is I've been a pastor for a while, so I'm not. It's not like I'm a newbie pastor having to tread carefully in quite the same way. So there's probably part of that. I do have more of a public voice. I know people listen to me, so that's probably shifted that some. And then, going through a kind of a crisis in our congregation where the people who stayed in the congregation want to be a social justice voice in the community and in the state, means I almost have like a call or a responsibility at this point to do that. We did this discernment process in January, as a congregation, to set some key strategic priorities. And what came up really in the list of all the different things that people named, one of the really high ones was to be a progressive faith voice in the state. So our congregation, at least many people in our congregation, want us to be that and are proud to have me do that or be that. Right. And so I probably have stepped into that more. And I don't think that there's very many of the things that I espouse or speak up about that are radically new. Most of them I've held for some time, but I've started to find that in order to get the conversation to where I want to see it go, I have to push out past the edge of what I might have said a few years ago. I'll give you one example. I used to say things more like, we need to be inclusive of the LGBT community. We need to accept them or welcome them. And that's something I've held for a long time. I'm more inclined now to say things like, gay sex is beautiful. Because I actually think you got to go beyond just, we'll let you be around. To, in the same way that I say that hetero marriage and heterosex is beautiful or something, that the same is true for same gender love. So that kind of articulation, or I just published a column last week actually in our local paper, from Rush Limbaugh to queering Christianity.
Oh yes, I read that.
And I just told the story of my transition from where I was when I was growing up and in high school, of being a pretty rabid, rabid's not the right word, strongly conservative thinker and listener to Rush Limbaugh when I was in high school, to where I am today, which the early seeds of that mostly all happened when I was at Luther College, while getting to know LGBT students and kind of learning their story and becoming hopefully a good advocate or ally for that. So I told that story in the column. I'm sure that that's the first time queering Christianity has shown up in the Northwest Arkansas Democrat Gazette. But I'm not alone in this either. So I mentioned a book in that column by Liz Edman. She's got a book that's coming out this month, Queer Virtue, which is what the church can learn from the LGBT community. That's what the book is about. She lives in New York now and is a ordained minister in the UCC. I probably have the denomination wrong, so sorry. But she grew up in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So it's also me, in their paper, celebrating one of their
hometown people.
Hometown people. And so I don't think that I'm actually cranky, although I think there's some ways in which it's good to be angry, because there are things that are worth being angry about. So, naming things that deserve righteous anger, that's probably not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'm cranky. I just think that rhetorically there's some responsibility to actually ramp it up enough for people to actually notice it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about that in terms of creativity, because I can feel in my own body and in my own brain as a songwriter that I'm less likely in my 40s to write a provocative lyric or to say something publicly or on the microphone that is pushing a boundary, because I find myself double or triple thinking everything I say or do to protect the feelings of whomever might be listening to me. So my own messages are I'm dialing myself back out of. Partially, it's because I'm trying to be caring and gentle to my listeners, and then partially it's because I'm paranoid that something bad might happen to me or something. And so it's fun to watch your life, because you seem to be going the other direction and getting more, pushing the boundaries more in a deliberate fashion. And as a rock musician primarily, there's such a expectation in rock music for, if it's going to be cool or effective, it has to be provocative and pushing boundaries. And I get that. And so I struggle with myself, like, maybe I need to, be more, to take more risks as a writer and as a public person at the microphone. And this all comes back to Steve Miller. Not necessarily that I want to talk about that issue, but Steve Miller ripped on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which had just inducted him. And then the Black Keys band came out, who had been his welcoming speech band, and then they felt bad. And they're the young punk rockers. You'd think they would have understood, but they felt dissed, that he didn't know who they were. And then I think about Springsteen. You were talking about what's going on in South Carolina, and Springsteen said, no, I'm not going to play in South Carolina, and tons of other bands have pulled out of that state, and maybe others too. And if we're still talking about the arts industry,
Mumford & Sons just announced they would donate all the money from their concert in North Carolina to LGBT causes.
Right.
Yeah.
And what were there? Big movie studios saying, we're not going to shoot our films in Georgia or in whatever, depending on how. So people in the arts have a history, of course, of taking a stand against.
I ain't gonna play Sun City.
I ain't gonna play Sun City, right? Thank you, little Steven. So, what do you think, as an agitator, the responsibility of the artist is to stay on the provocative edge of agitation?
Well, when you were talking just now and you were saying that you're worried about the listener's feelings, or not wanting to be too provocative in your lyrics, some of the people I've been listening to lately that would be counterexample to that I think I find interesting would be, like, for example, Kendrick Lamar's album.
Oh yeah,
To Pimp a Butterfly. Have you listened to that album?
No, but I saw his performance on was it the Grammys or whatever, which was really incredible and theatrical and amazing.
Yeah. There's this one song you should listen to. He does this bizarre voice in it, but there's a repeated refrain over and over again in this song. This dick ain't free. And it's about, it sounds like a swear word, but he's using that word like for the like, you can't game me as a working class guy, kind of thing. And then it's a really fascinating song. And then some of the albums that Neil Young has been putting out recently, which are super political.
Oh yeah, he's got his anti-Monsanto album, and he's getting more so and more specific with age.
Yeah, right. Which Neil Young is so interesting in the sense that he's always been able to do whatever he wanted, and apparently it works out for him. You know, he's got this unique voice. The tricky thing is that sometimes overly messaged art gets bad. Like then the music isn't very good or whatever. It's really amazing when musicians pull off both at the same time, like real direct messaging that's also profoundly beautiful or moving in its artistic merits. But you do get that sometimes. That's hard to do.
It is.
So I could see where that's different as a musician, maybe.
And it's so hard too for when your daily life is about childcare. You know, like I'm in such a domestic time of life. You know, that
get them on the bus, take them to choir, pick them up from comic book club,
right?
Take them to violin, take them to ballet.
It's not. I don't know. Maybe that's just a lame excuse because obviously I watch the evening news and I know there's lots of crap going on in the world that I could certainly write songs about. But I don't know why. I guess I'm just trying to be. Well, I also don't want to pontificate about something that I can't necessarily back up, and I think that's why it's so fun to watch your interactions online because you take a stand on stuff that's really bothers some of your readers, but you have such a rock solid comeback. Like you've got all your ducks in a row. So it's so I think it's wiser to make a provocative statement when you've done your homework, rather than just pontificating about something off the top of your head.
Yeah, or at least be able to look like you know what you're talking about. One piece of advice we did this series last fall. We've been doing a year-long study on race and faith in our adult forum, and we had guest speakers come in last fall that were around the issue of especially the Black Lives Matter campaign and the call of the ELCA to address racial injustice, in particular with the African American community. So we had a couple of guests from the law school, both African American, one a faculty person and one a student. And they were talking about their experiences on campus and in our community. And the faculty person, one of the things that she said was, you can't, most people don't have time to like invest in every issue. So pick one. And really lean in on that one thing that's really going to be your thing.
Wow.
And I see some wisdom in that. If you feel overwhelmed, like, oh wow, there's so many issues in the world, I can't address them all. Is pick one, and really because then you can burrow down and you can be knowledgable about that issue and you can speak about it and that kind of thing.
That's good advice.
It's also true that I think I have a philosophy of media that there are different things to communicate about or ways to communicate depending on what the media is. So like if you came to my church on Sunday morning and heard my sermons, I'm not doing like
takedowns,
hardcore messaging sermons, right? Like in my sermons, although I might mention a political connection or a cultural connection, like I think that genre, the sermon, is supposed to help people leave with with a depth of understanding of that biblical text that you were preaching on. That's my fundamental responsibility, is for them to have some insight into that text they didn't have before and meet Christ in and through it in some way. And so any kind of messaging, political messaging, it'll come up. I'm not saying that I don't mention it, but it's not like stand up and do a Black Lives Matters sermon or something like that. Other media contexts, I think, are deserving of the more direct messaging. So, like, I think just a kind of a general devotional column in the newspaper is just a waste of space, in my opinion. You know, like, why do that? Just, it's kind of vacuous.
What is your column's focus in your newspaper?
It's called Faith Matters, and it's a rotation of faith leaders in the community who write. So it depends on who's writing it that week. But this last time I did the thing about I'm concerned about the pushback on LGBTQ stuff right now in particular. So I'm trying to roll out, making sure we have a voice in anticipation of the next round in Arkansas, of keeping that there. Last month when I had a column, I went after Tyson because of their unethical faith practices, workplace practices for employees on the poultry lines. There was a big poultry report that was released by the Worker Justice Center in Northwest Arkansas, and so I was articulating some of their perspective and some of the stuff from the report, and then calling on Tyson to be responsive to what the Worker Justice Center is asking out of them. So I used the space for that purpose, and I think that that's a good use of that space. So it depends on the where you're talking about.
Yeah, you use the word genre, and I love that because you're using the sort of arts word to talk about your public speaking roles, whether it's giving a sermon, writing a column, being a digital citizen,
right,
being an author, being a speaker at an event. I mean, you're aware of genre, even though someone could argue, well, Clint's a pastor, but you have many genres even within your vocation. And I wonder too, like, if those of us who are making art start to feel like, well, we just do our one genre. But maybe a songwriter has multiple genres. If you think, I just write rock music, or I write gospel music, or I write country music. But But there's genres within those as well, and they all have a different job to do and a different motivation, and maybe a different audience, and even down to the nitty gritty, different chords, different melodies, different turnarounds, different instrumentation, or different cinematography, or if it's film or whatever it is. And that's interesting.
What do you have to lose if you're what are you afraid you're going to lose if you're? What's keeping you from being more pointed?
Yeah, well, I feel like I've been around a long time, and I have a lot of flexibility and freedom in the kind of gigs that I get, and a lot of people now, since it's been 25 years, I can kind of go anywhere in the country and know some people who will probably have me over to play a show. And I don't want to lose any of them or the chance to connect to them, And also, too, in some ways, I feel like my own career is less stable than it used to be because of my age and because of just the events in my life in the last 5 years or whatever, and also because of
streaming audio
and the loss of physical media, that I can't sell CDs to make money anymore. So my whole career is much more precarious than it used to be financially, and it's just a bigger risk. And also, I've made choices in recent years to make art that was more commercial, and it turned out to be way more successful than the riskier moves that I made. And I found a lot of fulfillment and satisfaction in the success of the commercial work, because I was like, oh my gosh, I can actually make stuff that people like. And that felt good.
This most recent album?
Yeah, this most recent album was a deliberate attempt to make a commercial record, and I think it's my most sort of friendly record, or to the ears or whatever, and that felt so good to do that. And then before, when I was recording Finnish folk music, there was just such a huge demand for that, that everyone felt it was filled with warm feelings, and it was so nice to be making art that made everyone happy and filled the room with joy, and then filled my email inbox with thank yous and invitations to play more songs, and it was just nothing but an upward spiral. And so I've had downward spirals and I've had upward spirals. And when I've deliberately tried to make art that's a little more commercial, I can catch a wave of an upward spiral. And boy, that feels so good. Like I don't necessarily want to wreck it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to see what Clint is going to say. You've got a look on your face like, I'm thinking about this. I'm going to say something very wise about this.
Well, what I'm trying to puzzle out is what I think I heard you say is that by being less, like pointed or partisan or political or something like that, you actually created an upward spiral for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm puzzling over is that clearly there are some artists who get that same upward spiral while also being political at the same time. And I wonder what it is about them or what they do that allows for that space.
Right. Well, and I think in my own career, too, when I was in my 20s, I took what I, at the time, felt like a risk, and I made that record Sound Theology, which was my riskiest album and also my most political and my most provocative record. And that's also that's the record that really changed my life and allowed me to have a career in the first place. Mm-hmm. So in my early life, it was the risk-taking that paid off and sort of set me apart and gave me a voice. And now in my midlife...
Inversion.
I feel like...
it's the midlife inversion.
I've had more good vibes and love come about from making art that people... that just feels good.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
it's more comfortable, I think.
Well,
comfortable is not a good word, though. It's more, it's friendlier, or uplifting, or something.
I think comfortable is. It's comfortable to listen to a song about your ancestors,
mm-hmm.
or about a love song or something versus
like an angry song or a song about
labor in China.
Well, I don't think of your most recent album as lacking in any kind of. It's not like just pop, fuzzy, vacuous.
That's true.
At all.
No, that's true. I mean, the lyrics are. There's definitely serious business and maturity in the lyrics for sure. But I think I'm even talking sonically or just how it appears to the marketplace. It's more commercial. That's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I want my art to be real. I don't need my art. I don't need art to be direct messaging. It's not, it's not a partisan blog post.
Yeah.
And I think that if you wrote a novel, for example, that was trying to just convince everybody to vote for Hillary Clinton, that would just hurt. Right?
Yeah.
Because a novel needs more depth than that. It needs to be about like life in this bigger sense, I think. And music is probably similar to that. So mm-hmm. I don't think that I have expectations when I listen to an album that it's going to have that kind of like, oh, this is going to support this,
mm-hmm.
Ideological viewpoint or something. That being said, there's space also for an ideological album. That would be intriguing if you can pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
I think that To Pimp a Butterfly is an ideological album,
mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating and disturbing for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that I think that. No, I know for sure that the messaging albums of Neil Young are not my favorite ones. My favorite Neil Young album of the last decade is La Noise.
Oh,
which is all about the sound,
right?
Not about the lyrics per se.
Yeah.
So, this is again where I think the genre piece matters. Like maybe you're worried that your music doesn't match the Facebook post that I posted midweek, but that's not the point of a song.
Well, what you said earlier was good. That you want art to be real, and if the art is real and it's commercial, then it's still real. So the commercial, if it's commercial or not, is not the issue. The issue is it real? Is it coming from the artist in a real way?
Yeah.
And if it is, and it also happens to be commercial, then great. And if the art is real and it's non-commercial, then that's also great because the art is real.
Yeah.
But you could also have art that doesn't feel real, and it's super commercial, or art that doesn't feel real and it's super non-commercial.
It's the quadrant.
Yeah, there is a quadrant. You're right.
The real and commercial quadrant.
Yeah, like I would put Taylor Swift in the real pop category. Like, it's obviously pop.
Yeah.
And I love her lyrics and music.
Yeah.
Like at the same time.
Right.
And then there's other pop that
Maybe
is just
not.
embarrassing.
Right.
Yeah, to me anyway. So that is tricky. Going back to the speaking out thing, I do think this. I worry in the church generally, and especially about clergy, like their leadership in the church, that a majority of them are operating out of fear. And so they don't speak up for what's right because they're afraid. And so probably I am even more vocal than I might be otherwise, because I sometimes feel like maybe I'm one of the few ones willing to operate a little more fearlessly.
Yeah.
I have some freedom to operate a little more fearlessly because of some of the things I've been through in my career. So I'm like on the other side of some things that I think some clergy are afraid they'll have to go through. So there's probably that dynamic there. But there's almost kind of this thing, I would say, where churches require that clergy pursue a strategy of only being mildly interesting.
Yeah.
Because if you stand out or are too interesting, that isn't going to work out super well for you in a leadership position in the church. And that's too bad.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. Have you lost some friends in the last couple of years with the things you've said and done in your vocation and online?
What? Lost some friends? Like that were already my friends before?
Yeah, or have you had any impact in your
Ruptured relationships.
We
were talking about that at dinner.
Well, I mean, a percentage of my congregation left 2 years ago.
240.
Yeah, right. 40% of the congregation left and started a new church. That was over gay marriage and other things. And they would say it was more over other things than gay marriage, but the presenting issue was that I officiated some weddings of same-gender couples, and the other people didn't want me to be doing that. So that was a big split. Now, see, I've always kind of operated on this philosophy because it's descriptively true of the ELCA, our denomination, that it's made up of people from a wide variety of political perspectives and social perspectives. And so tried to operate as a big tent, like, okay, my perspective is here, but there's a range of perspectives within the congregation, and let's all try to figure out how to kind of like live together and be church together. And I think increasingly, so one step further then, the way a lot of leaders handle that is they try to appear as if they don't have a perspective. So the way to keep a bunch of people with different perspectives together is to lead the organization by appearing as if you don't have a perspective, which I think is a bunch of I just think that's a problem. And so I operate more on I try to operate this way. I have a perspective. You all have your perspectives. And I think it's okay for me to live and speak and act out of the perspective that I hold, because I think I believe it's true. And so I think it's actually a responsibility to articulate that perspective. And I think we can still honor each other even if we disagree with each other. What I have found over time is that faith communities don't deal super well with that, and so they feel like they have to not be affiliated with something where the leader holds a perspective different from their own. Intriguingly, though, since the people have left, I've had people join our church since the split who are themselves conservative in a completely different place than me. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, it's kind of fun to hang out with these like hippy-dippy Lutherans, even though I have this perspective. Mm-hmm. And somehow they have a non-anxious presence in the presence of people who differ from them. Mm-hmm. So you can do it. But what's really liberating, and why I would encourage people to do this, is in the short term it was kind of painful, but in the long term, what it means is we all get to live together and be transparent as to who we are, rather than like try to guard everyone from knowing.
It's so exhausting to have a secret.
Yeah. I can't. Well, I don't think I'm constitutionally able to do it very well. I don't do the poker. It's just not my thing to do like a poker face.
Yeah.
Have you always been like that? Or has that been something you've grown into more with your adult?
Oh, no, I think that's something, that's my family is like that, my dad in particular, so I learned it from my dad. I don't know if my grandpa was a state legislator in Iowa. So I grew up visiting the state capitol, and my grandpa was like that too. People would come to our family, like our holiday dinners, and they'd sit down and we'd like be debating some state political issue or something at the dinner tables, and they were like, whoa, that's like, we would break the rules of what what you're not supposed to talk about at the dinner table with guests. You know?
Yeah.
But the question is, after that conversation, everybody was fine with each other? Do you think afterwards?
A lot of the time, yes.
Because I think that's what seems to be different now is you sit down and, people have that conversation at the end. It's like, I can't be your friend anymore. They're unfriending because, or there's a rupture in the relationship because of the difference.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's because the difference is so big or just because we don't know. A lot of people don't know anymore how to live in the tension of like, wow, you have really different beliefs on these things than me, but isn't it great we can both be friends still?
Well, I think we have I don't know to what degree things are different than they used to be, but people do say that you're able to affiliate with like-minded people more in our culture than you used to be. Because
you mean you just have the freedom to do so?
You have more freedom to do so because there's like, you can join a club of everybody thinks the same thing as you.
Right.
There's a Facebook group for that.
Sure, yeah.
Just look it up.
Yeah.
People who agree with me. And then, you can find that group.
Right.
So that does happen, and maybe mobility also contributes to that you can move to places where you can move into neighborhoods or among people that agree with you more, something like that. Mm-hmm. I try to foster context and community where people can disagree. I think that there's a real art to that. It's not easy to do.
No, it's not easy to do. I find that I've had times in my life where I've had more fortitude and have been able to navigate that better, and then I've had times in my life where I've had less fortitude, and those relationships cause more pain. And it's not even like, it's like I can separate it out and say, oh, in my public life, or I can live in community with these people. But in my personal life, in my own self, there's a lot of pain, and that's the thing when you can act in public with a lot of openness. But boy, my internal, it just hurts to be in the presence sometimes of people who are on a different wavelength than myself. And like I said, sometimes it's harder than others. And I'm trying to figure out, am I at a vulnerable time now, or am I entering in a more stable time? I don't know. It's a transitional moment. But it's always weird when it's an election year. That just makes everything weirder, because it's just on the news so much and everything seems more volatile.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous, actually. It's exhausting to watch. I'm so sick of the phrase Donald Trump.
Well, I think it's interesting to think about people who, they're not in creative professions, necessarily. You know, they're not writing songs or painting paintings, or they don't have a column in the newspaper, or they don't have a platform. They're just, going to work every day. And so how do they find an expression of what they think is important, or what they value, if they would say, well, I'm not a creative, I don't. How does someone who doesn't have those methods of expression express themselves creatively?
Well, Facebook just expanded the like button out to things like smiley faces and hearts and stuff like that.
Weeping tears.
Yeah,
So,
that's pretty interesting.
I mean, actually, I'm that's half in jest, and that's actually also serious. Like, I think a form of cultural advocacy in our culture is to push up the viewership of things that you like, that you see. So yeah, you may not write the tweet, but retweeting it serves a kind of valuable function in a sense, because it can get the right message out. I think this is where that thing of like pick one thing can also apply. Like, maybe you don't have a platform for writing a column or something, but there are all kinds of tools online that are more like an individual form of communication, and like an example would be, you can go on to the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service website right now and find what their current advocacy issue is for refugees, and you can use their pre-formatted letter and send it to your Congress people, so you don't have to write the letter or be that creative. You just it just requires the attention and work of going and doing that, sending that letter. Do you think, I don't even know really, I'm such a messaging person. Like, I have my voice in a lot of places. I don't know if that's just, if more, I wonder if, I really don't know. Do more people wish that they had that kind of platform, or many people are probably happy that they don't have that platform and wouldn't want it? I don't really know. I wonder if that's even a question people have. Yeah,
maybe not. I feel like just because we know so many people who do have a platform and have, I think that's such an honor to be able to share your writing or your song or a photo or something like that, to sort of have your creativity enter the world and maybe make a statement about something you value. But I suppose that's getting more democratized, like you said, with the rise of social media and that sort of thing.
Well, just as an example, the living example of this is many people would have just gotten together and sat around the kitchen table and chatted tonight, but without the microphones at the kitchen table. But since you guys do a broadcast thing, and I do broadcast things too, this kind of thing, and format makes sense to us, and it's. But I love that. I wouldn't trade it for the anonymity, because it's just really fun. Like an example would be, I have a member who just joined our congregation this year. He grew up on a farm in Arkansas, and he's been gay as long as he can remember. But he grew up in churches where he was taught that you were supposed to, if you prayed hard enough, that would go away. And he wrote me a note today, just as like, I saw some of the pushback that you had on something you posted about affirmation of the gay community, and I know that must be hard, but keep doing it because you save lives. Wow. Like, for him, it's been life-saving to hear somebody actually affirm who he is, having gone through so much of his life where he'd heard this other messaging, and you get those kinds of feedback periodically that makes that worth it, and it gives you an insight. It's funny, if you're a publisher or you have a platform, that doesn't mean that everybody's actually giving you any feedback on how that's going. I An example would be KUAF, the radio station that I do a spot for periodically. They have tens of thousands of listeners, but they might get a couple of comments a day back from the listeners, so the you can almost feel like you're broadcasting into this vacuum. And yet then I'll be running down the bike path and somebody will be biking by and they'll say, I heard you on the radio the other day. So it's like it's out there more than you think.
Yeah.
It's just the majority of people, I guess thankfully, because it'd be overwhelming if 10,000 people all wrote you a note back after they heard you on the radio, right? But mostly people just listen and then go on with their lives. That's just kind of the way it is.
That's true. Even the people who like what you're saying are the percentage of them who will actually let the world know or send you a message that they like what you're saying. It's like 1%. And even the negative people, there's probably a little bit more negative people who would let you know. But the reality is, if you're making art or having a public voice on any regard, and you're starting to feel bummed, like, gosh, nobody is hearing this stuff, or you're just feeling like you're swinging and missing every time. Well, statistically speaking, chances are it's getting out there more than you think it is. Here's a perfect example. I'm looking at my Twitter feed right now here. Somebody tweeted at me this week. I got to look up his name so I can give him a shout out here on the air. Oh, crud. But anyway, he was talking about Janesville, Wisconsin, where his wife is from. And, here it is. P.T. Hilton, P-T-H-Y-L-T-O-N from Tennessee, who I don't even know him at all. Bluff City, Tennessee is where he lives. He tweeted about Janesville, Wisconsin, because I have a song called Janesville. And he said something like, Jonathan Runman wrote a song about this. And he tagged me. And so it showed up in my feed. And I wrote back and I said, wow, thanks. How in the world did you discover that song? And then he said, I'm an old fan from years ago, which means that song's from 1997. So it's 20 years ago that P.T. Hilton heard that song probably. And I'd never met him and never heard from him in 20 years. And then he said, and I'm really enjoying the Look Up album. So just to prove that he knew my music 20 years ago and he has my new record somehow. And it was just incredible because I have been in kind of a promotional mode for my new music and really trying to get the word out. And it's hard work to do. And there's not a lot of evidence that you're getting any traction. You just have to trust that the PR you're doing is reaching someone. And so I just keep on plugging away. And then P.T. Hilton here was an example, like, wow, it actually is working in some fashion. Like somebody in a distant state who I've never met has these songs playing in their car or on their phone. To me, that's my whole goal. Like I want the songs to be the soundtrack of people's normal life. And that's how it is with this guy in Bluff City, Tennessee. So it's just amazing. Once in a while, you get a little reminder that, wow, it's things work.
Yeah, and I've taken time every once in a while. I've taken time to write to an author that I've read, for example, even big name ones, and you're surprised at how little feedback they actually get. I remember a number of years ago when I read The Magicians by Lev Grossman. I wrote to him and just thanked him for the book.
Is he a well-known, big-time author?
Huge.
Okay.
That's like the sci-fi show right now is The Magicians. It's now optioned as a television show.
Cool. I've never heard of it.
He wrote this trilogy and whatever, and I remember what he was like, thanks. It's good to. I hadn't heard much yet about the book. It's like best-selling novel on the New York Times bestseller list, and still not a ton of messages. So you scale that down from the level of sales he has,
right, to an indie.
Yeah, to indie, and you got the percentage off of that's going to actually respond to you in some way. Yeah. So on the one hand, that's true, and then on the other hand, I think there is a transition that's happening in media where more and more, for better or worse, content creators are also needing to engage the community around their content in interactive ways that didn't used to function at that level. And in fact, one of my favorite examples of this is Amanda Palmer. Yeah, she's just like the genius of community engagement around her art. Yeah, and her platform is based on her art, but it's also based on the amazing community building that she does around her art. And I think that's a big part of the new media context.
Yeah. Well, here's a little takeaway lesson for the listeners. If you have a artist or author or speaker or public person that has impacted your life and influenced your daily existence, and you really appreciate their work, you could go on Twitter or Facebook or to their website, and you could send them a message. Like, it would take you about 40 seconds. It would take no effort and almost no time. And you could just write like, wow, I love this such and such a thing that you did, and it's been a part of my life for years or the last week or whatever. And these days, with the way things work, it's that person, chances are the actual person will see that. No matter how famous they are. Like, chances are they're going to see that message, especially if it's a good one, like an encouraging thing.
Yeah.
And what a great boost you could give the artist that you love by reaching out to them and saying, I love your work. It's part of my life. You're awesome. Keep it up, you know?
Yeah, that's definitely true that the new media has leveled accessibility in ways that we never saw before.
Yeah.
You can be friends with the CEO of a major corporation on Facebook or tweet to them and get a response.
Yeah.
And you never used to be able to do that.
That's right.
Have that kind of access.
Yeah.
Not all of them are like that, but
well, Twitter
number.
Twitter is so much fun because that's, to me, the platform where that can really happen. More than any other one that I can think of. I mean, it's just so cool. And you know, on this podcast and in life, obviously, we're talking a lot about what the artists can do for their own artistic journey. But this brings in a whole new thing, like because all of us experience art from the observer's perspective, and what is our obligation to the artist? Because not only do we make creative work, but we love creative work that other people make. And do we have an obligation to reach out to that person, in addition to buying their work or whatever, supporting them, but to thank them verbally, or if you can, say hi to them or send them a message, and do it in a polite, classy, appropriate way. And because, man, that could really be a great thing to encourage them to keep doing the good stuff.
Producage. Remember producage?
No, what's that?
Produsage. It's a concept. The best, most popular illustration of it I know is the Lego Movie. Because in the Lego Movie, they use footage from fan-produced stop animation that people have made of Lego. You know, fans have made little Lego movies, and then the Lego Movie incorporated that kind of footage into the movie itself.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So you have this loop where the user is also the producer. And the producage, the concept there is that users are producers, that increasingly companies are going to their consumers and letting the consumers be a part of the final product. You've got, like, you know, if a game creator does a Kickstarter project for a game, they'll let them print and play the game as it's being produced and give further input into the content of the game, or so that there's more of this feedback loop. And producers have learned that they can build a consumer base, and a faithful consumer base, when the consumer also gets to be a part of the production.
Yeah. Yep. What can you tell our listeners about your next artifact? Do you have another book in brewing?
Well, I've got a couple of artifacts that are in process right now. The one that's taking up a lot of my time is I launched together with a couple of other people in Fayetteville, launched a nonprofit this spring. In fact, this is fun. We launched we signed the paperwork to officially become a nonprofit on February 1st, the same day, 2 years later that I published Mediating Faith.
Oh, yeah.
And it's Canopy of Northwest Arkansas, and it's a nonprofit for refugee resettlement.
Oh, yes.
And we're deep in the throes of trying to establish a refugee resettlement center in Northwest Arkansas.
Wow.
So we've got staff from LIRS coming in May to do like a site assessment, and we're fundraising and we're doing all this kind of stuff. And so has been very, very busy because it's not enough that I'm a pastor of a church and a parent, and we decided we would launch a nonprofit too. But it's been really interesting and fun. So that's kind of an artifact, I guess, of sorts. And then the other project I have going on, which is a writing project, is this summer I'm bringing together a group. I invited you and you turned me down.
Yes, we couldn't come.
To write a book in a week. So we're getting together in July, and we're going to write a book on faith and creativity, especially or primarily from a progressive faith perspective. And so all the authors are thinking about the topic of how to both exemplify and fund creativity. So we got some different chapters that people are working on that are going to be around this topic. I'm going to be writing on gaming and play and faith formation. We've got a graphic novelist who's going to write an actual graphic novel chapter that'll be part of the book. Got a chapter on slam poetry and how faith is related to the community that gets established around slam poetry. We're going to have a chapter on design theory and faith, and so there's just going to be a variety of pieces in there. But there's not been much written on the topic of faith and creativity from a progressive Christian. It's one of the things when we were doing the research around trying to market this to a publisher, we realized nobody's writing about this, or not much recently anyway. And I personally think, this is going back to what I was talking about earlier, where it's almost like leaders they avoid being creative because it makes them stand out, and if you stand out, then you might get negative response or something. So out of fear, they just don't create. We really are in a moment where we need the progressive faith voice to be a creative, life-giving source. And so, like, squashing creativity in the church, which is what I see happen quite a bit, is just a really unfortunate thing. And what we really want to do is offer models for and foster creativity.
And if people wanted to find out about that eventual book, it'll be at clintschnekloth.com or something someday. Is there a name for it? Is it going to have its own presence online?
We don't have this. No, I don't know where that'll be online.
Okay,
yet.
well, in the future, listeners can...
Because I don't want to overcommit who might publish it or whatever.
Sure, but they could eventually track you down in the future, and if and when it shows up, you'll be someone who knows about it.
There's only one Clint Schnekloth in the universe, or at least on the planet, and so, if you look me up, you'll be able to find something about it.
Yeah. All right.
Well, all three of us are the only three people in the world with our names.
Our names.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
We haven't talked about it much, or as much as maybe we could have, but I know you're interested in the future. What do you think will happen in the future? Pick one thing, Clint, that maybe you're excited about, like you're like, yes, there's 90% certainty this is going to happen in the future.
One of the things I've been thinking a lot about, I don't know if I'd say that I'll just say it this way. There's a whole bunch of social concerns that are kind of front and center right now. And many of them I consider to be very important, like, inclusion of diversity and not allowing our Islamophobia to create the very things that we fear, and overcoming continuing racial injustice in the country. And there's a lot of different things like that would be on my short list of stuff that really matters. One of the ones that I'm really aware of myself that I think less people are concerned about than should be is I think soon, and probably very soon, our intelligent computer design stuff is going to actually catch up with where we imagine it's going to go, and it's going to change things, and it's going to change things radically. Whether that's our ability to change, to kind of unzipper and rezip DNA and radically change how we're made up biologically, or whether that means like in terms of the melding of the kind of this computer with the human. I think all of that kind of stuff is going to happen really fast. And when computers are able to think for themselves, and especially when they start communicating with each other and then doing things or making decisions, that's going to shift stuff really fast.
Yeah. Exponential.
The people are if you go online and you like read some stuff about this, what you find out is that all the experts in this area say this is going to happen. It's going to happen it's going to happen sooner than we think, and when it happens, it's going to be very dramatic. Not quite as like dramatic as the theories around the singularity are sometimes described, but nevertheless, I think it's going to be a really, really significant shift. And what it's going to shift is it's going to shift a whole bunch of things that aren't even on our horizon much right now. Like, we're going to have to start making new moral decisions we've never had to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Do you kill the robot?
right. Do you baptize robots?
Yeah.
Are clones equal to human beings if a human being is cloned?
Yes. No.
Well,
sorry.
the genetic statement of the ELCA actually does say that. So we actually have
Okay.
a statement on it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So we've actually we've stayed up to date on a couple of these pieces with our social statements in the ELCA, which is interesting. But I think this is the one that of the things I think about that the rest of the world seems to not think about as much. This is the one that I'm pretty aware of and interested in. And our prophets on this are the science fiction community.
Yeah. Did you find any treats in your search of science fiction bookstores today?
We did find some amazing treats, yes. And one of them is about AI, The Worlds of Android. It's a book that Fantasy Flight Games published last year that summarizes the Android universe. The Android universe, can we end with this?
Yeah.
The Android universe is a universe that's a spin-off of Shadowrun and like Neuromancer, kind of like the William Gibson cyberpunk world. And Fantasy Flight Games took that kind of concept and they created a world, and then they've got some games that run in that world. The biggest one is called Netrunner. It's a asymmetrical 2-player card game where you're either a hacker attacking the corporation, or you're the core itself defending itself against the hackers trying to infiltrate the network of the corporation. And in this Android world, so the card game is just like doing that, but there's a whole like imaginative world that the card game takes place inside of. And then they've also written novels in this world, and there's a board game for Android and everything. And so they just published a book last year, The Worlds of Android, which I've been really jonesing to read. It's sold out on all online things, but they actually had it at the game store itself here because Fantasy Flights publishes that book, so I picked it up. But the premise is kind of intriguing, is 2 major corporations emerge. This is in the near future. And each one of them has developed a technology that allows them to replace most human function. Haas Bioroid has developed like a more of an AI, like robots, and Jinteki does cloning, and they modify the human clone to make them subhuman. So that they don't look like, because it's disturbing if you see something that really acts and functions like a human being almost mirroring you, so they make them look different, that kind of thing. And then they use those, either robots or clones, to do the tasks that the humans don't want to do. And then there's a third organization that emerges in this imaginative world called Human First, which does not like the emergence of either one of these things, and they're famous for going and taking big, attacking robots when they get the chance and trying to destroy them because they think they shouldn't be around. And in this world, somebody has built a beanstalk, which is like a cave. Have you ever heard of a beanstalk? By the way, this is a really cool concept. There's different theories that people have developed about how to actually get to outer space more easily than rocket ships. And one of the concepts is to launch something up and then build a cable where what's at the top is actually in orbit.
Oh yeah.
And then attach a cable, and then the pull of the in orbit device keeps the cable there, and then you can run stuff up and down the cable. And so you don't have to have the force of an actual rocket to go up. So there's a beanstalk in this universe, and so people have settled the moon, and they're starting to settle Mars. And so that's kind of the world in which this universe takes place. But in the novels and in the worlds of Android, the big moral questions that are always coming up are how the clones and the robots are being distinguished from the humans, and so they have robots that are smarter than humans, but they never allow those robots to, say, be the president of a corporation, even though they might make better decisions than the real people, for example. And so there's all these kind of moral conundrums. And if you're a police officer and your partner is a robot, do you have any moral incentive to protect your partner in the same way that you would another human partner? I mean, they're sentient robots.
Do they fall in love with the humans?
Do the
clones?
I don't remember the clones.
Who falls in love? That has to be part of it.
Well, there are robots that are designed as
love partners
love
to the human?
partners for the humans. So
is that what they're called?
No,
love partners.
I forget. They're like they're basically like
robo
sex slave. I forget.
Yeah.
I forget what they're called. It's not a major part of the universe, but there are robots that are built to be like pretty servants, so when they're going around in a bar serving drinks or whatever, and then they're also available for other purposes.
Yeah.
I'm asking though, do they fall in love with the robots?
Well, humans always fall in love with robots. That's true already now. Have you read Sherry Turkle?
No.
Sherry Turkle used to be a huge proponent of new technology. She works at the MIT labs, and her most recent book, Alone Together, she kind of has made a about switch, and she's just a little worried at the way people interact with robots, because we're all, humans in general, are very willing to let robots replace humans in our life as surrogate objects for everything. Even much lower grade robots than what I'm talking about in this imaginative world, just like literally like
your phone. Box on the counter.
If it has some mode of seeming like a human being, people will start to interact with it.
Yeah.
And get emotional attachment to it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a good place to end. Humans always fall in love with robots.
Well, and we always end the show with asking about what you say your kindergarten self, but we want to encourage the listeners to go back and listen to episode 2, where Clint made his debut appearance on our show, and he'll answer that question for you at the end of that episode. But thank you, Clint Schnekloth, for being one of the rare return guests to Creativity Drill, and thank you, listeners, for listening, and we will encounter you again in the virtual world. Good night.
Creativity Drill.